Greetings to our viewers, and join us as we delve into Sharing a Flywing, a memoir of growing up on Virgin Gorda, British Virgin Islands by author Hildegard Flackshaw. For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Department of Culture, I am your GIS host, Sanjay Greenwich. And today we're very excited and privileged to be joined by the Director of Culture, Dr. Catherine Smith. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And the Lady of the Hour, author Hildegard Flackshaw. Thank you so much for being here on this program today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And I'm going to start with Mrs. Flackshaw. First of all, let me extend a hearty congratulations to you. You know, it's always good when authors can contribute in this particular space. You know, it's always heartening to learn that a creative has again added to this space. So I know that your book is a very deep and personal account. So can you, for the benefit of our viewers, summarize what Sharing a Flywing is about?
Sharing a Flywing is about growing up on Virgin Gorda in the 50s and 60s. I was just a little girl at that time. It talks about activities that my family and I engaged in. And there were no cars, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. So it was, things were hard in a lot of ways, but we didn't think that they were because we had nothing with which to compare our lives. We didn't know that other children didn't live the way we live. We didn't know that other children didn't have to grow their food and so forth. So it's about all the adventures that we had during that time.
Great.
Without the conveniences of modern day life.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. At this time, I would like to, for a bit of a context, turn to Dr. Smith. As we know, one of the major objectives of the Department of Culture is to preserve cultural heritage in the BVA. Can you tell us how does this specific collaboration align with the government's legislative agenda?
Well, first we'd like from the Department of Culture also to congratulate Mrs. Flackshaw on her launching of this book. And thank you for traveling from California
Yes.
to the BVI and for including the launch of this book in your travels here. Thank you so much. I want to say that, okay, for this particular book, we're excited because it is placed within Virgin Gorda. And it has become very important to include the sister islands equally in everything that we do in terms of culture and heritage. When we document and preserve history, a lot of times we go to the official records. As by trade, I'm a historian, and you're digging through the archives, but there is nothing like a first-hand account. It's almost like it's not oral history, but it is a first-hand account that is equally as valuable and adds so much to the documentation of history. You really can't get this sort of personal account going through the records, and then the fact that it's about growing up on Virgin Gorda makes it that much more important.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Smith. Author Flackshaw. Sharing a Flywing. This title is very interesting and captivating, but I don't know what it means. So can you give us a bit of insight about what has led to this particular title?
Absolutely. The book is dedicated to my mom's memory. Sharing a Flywing is a lesson. It's about a lesson that she taught us throughout our lives. We were not allowed to, let's say, have a can of soda by ourselves. It had to be divided into 4 equal parts so that each child got a taste of that soda. If we had one fruit, it had to be cut into 4 pieces so each child got a piece of it. And she would say, it doesn't matter what you have, even if it's a flywing, you have to share it. And children take things literally. And I thought, as a little girl, why would anyone want to eat a fly wing? And you know how small a fly wing is. The
Yeah.
lesson she was trying to convey was it doesn't matter how little it is, you needed to share it. And it was not just children who were encouraged to share, but it was also practice among adults. For instance, when the men pulled in their fish pots, they would share their fish with the neighbors or friends. It wasn't a matter of having to buy them. And so it was a common practice to just share with each other. So sharing a fly wing was just a lesson that my mom taught us throughout our lives, and I passed it on to my children.
I obviously
Yeah.
stuck with you.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us how long did this entire work take to complete? Like from the time it was conceptualized to what we have here.
I wrote this book over about a 7-year period because I call it my accidental work because I never intended to write a book. What I planned to do was make a notebook of sorts for my children who were born in the United States so they would know how I grew up and what the things I didn't have that they so freely took for granted. So I planned to make notes, but then a friend of mine, a coworker actually, knowing that I was from Virgin Gorda, would frequently say, Hildy, tell me about this and tell me about that on Virgin Gorda. What did you do for fun and what was it like? And I would talk to her about milking the cows with my dad and walking on the dark, unpaved roads with lanterns so we didn't stump our feet against the rocks and so forth. And she would say, God, what a fascinating life you had. You should write a book. And she told me that several times, and I thought, yes, I should write a book. So that's how it actually all got started and becoming a book. And I didn't work on it religiously, just sort of over about a 7-year period. Every now
Okay.
and then I wrote a little bit, and then suddenly I had a book.
Did you have any
So
particular times of the day where you felt inclined to write? Like, were you focusing on doing it more on mornings as opposed to afternoons, for example?
most of my writing I've done in the early morning when I'm having tea in my garden. I have a table and umbrella in my garden, so I sit there and sip my tea and write. And there are times at night when I wake and some idea pops into my head, so I get out of bed and go to my computer. So, but a lot of it has been done in the morning in my garden.
Okay. Well, going back to what you would have said about persons being fascinated about your childhood, Dr. Smith, if I can get you in on the conversation here a bit, can you tell us if there are any national plans for promoting and advancing documentation, like a primary research or any research that might be valuable?
Well, I know that, well, what we've been talking about is establishing an excellent oral history program, one that is comprehensive and covers all of the Virgin Islands. And that is so important because in order to really, as I spoke about, get that experience, that firsthand account, the real information, that's accurate, it's important to hear from everyone. So we would be talking about elders because what we know is that the experience in West End might be different from the experience on East End, might be different from the experience on Virgin Gorda, Joss Van Dyke. So it would be important to establish that kind of far-reaching oral history program so that we can now you correlate and you cross reference that with the written documents and with each other and you really start to have that strong history. And I want to also make the point here that we love to document our political history, for example, in the BVI, but our cultural history, it actually, in the formal sense of documenting it, the best
Mm-hmm.
that what we have here are these sort of books that are written first-hand account, and that makes them even more valuable, just to be able to have that sort of socio-cultural history
Right.
documented as well. But to answer that, we would look forward to an oral history program, and hopefully we'll be requesting some assistance from some experts along the way.
Okay, so sharing a flavor was originally and initially intended to be notes for your children.
Yes.
And now now is going to be accessible by a much wider cross section of persons who I'm sure will be privileged to delve into it and read it and so on. Can you tell us what do you hope readers achieve by reading your personal account?
Well, especially the people who live on Virgin Gorda, this generation, who know perhaps very little of my generation and the way we grew up.
Yes.
One of my cousins has already said to me, I, I didn't know about this, I didn't know about that. And I'm glad that you wrote the book because they now have all the conveniences of modern day life that we didn't have, that we grew up without. And we were very carefree, happy children. We didn't know we were missing anything or lacking
Right.
anything. And, my children, when they were younger, said, Mom, you didn't have a television, you didn't have a telephone. What did you do? We went to church, we went to school, we played with each other, we talked to each other, which
Right.
those are things that are being lost these days. People don't talk to each other very much anymore. So I hope that by my writing this book and recalling memories from my childhood, it will help to preserve some of the our heritage that the younger people don't really know about. They haven't experienced it.
Right. As it relates to that sharing of knowledge across generations, can you tell us a bit about what the research process looked like? Were there any like significant places or persons that you had to visit towards completing this book?
I didn't really have to do a lot of research other than the research about the history of the island as such.
Right.
Every chapter in this book is my personal memory of whatever that chapter is titled. Christmas is past. There are chapters on one chapter on my mother, my father, my grandmother, my siblings. Other old practices that I don't know if they still do them. Things like making a coal pit to burn coal with which we cooked,
Right.
celebrating Guy Fawkes' Day. I don't know if those things still happen, but all of those things were my personal memories. And so I didn't have to research them.
Okay, thank you for that. I know you would have mentioned in the book as well your days of growing up in a one room school. Uh, is the school still in the same location? Is it still there?
The school has been rebuilt and
Okay.
so moved to a different location. I think it's now the Brigada Flax Educational Center. He was my uncle,
Oh,
my great uncle. But we did grow up in a one room schoolhouse, or attend a one room schoolhouse, and you can see the picture in the book there. And you wonder if children really went to school in this place. It was just full of holes everywhere in the sides of the walls and the roof. And so when it rained, we all scampered to find a dry spot, and we sang choruses and rounds to occupy ourselves until the rain was over and we could go back to our regular seats. So, but that school was instrumental in teaching us a lot of great lessons, helping us appreciate the arts, believe it or not, because of the headmasters we had at the time. We had one headmaster who made us sit and listen to classical music in the afternoons for like an hour. And, we hated the music, we hated him, It was, but over the years, as time went by, I learned that this was my favorite music to listen to. It still is. And it all happened in that one room schoolhouse.
that's interesting.
And yes, so we learned a lot of valuable lessons in that leaky place.
One of the questions that I also wanted to ask, and I was wondering about, what advice would you give to young authors or prospective authors about writing? How should they go about? Are there any like particular steps that you would recommend, especially as it relates to writing memoirs?
You know, I say let your imagination run wild because that's what happened with us. One of our headmasters, we were just young children. He gave us very quirky titles with which we were to form essays, you know, write a simple short story about these quirky titles. And so we would have to sit there and figure out a story in our little minds. And he said he was fostering our creative abilities. And so I learned to love writing from a very young age. I didn't do anything about it until now, but
Right.
I was writing for a long time. So they need to just put their little thoughts on paper. I think it's also good to read other authors and see the styles that they adopt as they're writing and just write.
Just right. That's
Yes,
a takeaway.
just write.
Just right.
Whatever comes to your mind, whatever your mind produces, just put it on paper, and before you know it, you have a story to tell.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that authors, prospective authors, would find that information valuable. At this time, Dr. Smith, I'm going to ask if you have any questions for author.
I think I know that you have another book. We have a nice, very pleasant surprise coming up for the book launch because you actually produced a second book and you have that in time for this book launch. I'm wondering whether you can inform us about the title and tell us a little bit about that book.
That book is titled An Enduring Passion, True Stories of Half a Century with Her Patients. It's about a registered nurse. It's written in the third person, so she is referred to, that nurse is referred to as she throughout the book. And she's identified at the very end of the book as Hildegard because I am that person. And on the book, I wish I had a copy to show you, there's a flaming heart on the cover. And that flaming heart is supposed to be symbolic of my passion for my profession. Because I've been doing it so long, I love it. And it's about adventures with my patients. And they really are true stories, every one I've experienced with my patients.
Great. So I'm interested in where persons might be able to purchase both of these books.
Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It will
Amazon.
be available and directly from me.
And they'll be available also at the launch.
Yes, that is the hope.
Great. So can you tell us a bit about the launch? When is it? Where is it? Who's invited?
Everyone is invited. I want as many people there as possible. It will be this coming Saturday, April the 13th, at the Flex building on Virgin Gorda, and the time is 10 a.m. And everyone is welcome.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. To both of my guests, Dr. Catherine Smith, Director of Culture, thank you for joining us, and Mrs. Hildegard Flatshaw, the author of 2 newly published books. So thank you so much, and we're looking forward to your launch this upcoming Saturday.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this program. For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Department of Culture, I have been your GIS host, Sanjay Greenwich.